So Season 5 is here, and with a few days under our belt now at this point, having a hefty playtime in Warzone since the update and testing weapons, trying them all out and seeing what works best, I wanted to kick off this weekend with our Season 5 top 10 plus best meta weapons and loadouts for Season 5 of Warzone. As we go along, drop your thoughts down below. What do you think of the current meta? Like that it's pretty healthy? Like that there's a decent amount of weaponry that you can choose from? As well, if you'd like to add anything to the list, feel free to. I imagine we're all here for the same reasons, to try and do as best as possible within Warzone, so if you want to share something to the community, feel free to. And before we jump into the weapon changes and loadouts at hand, if you guys would like to join in on live discussions and hang out, we're building the Twitch channel and community back up. We're live most nights as of late, so if you're interested, check the link in the description below. But anyways, let's talk about these changes and the new top 10 loadouts that you should be using. So as of the Season 5 update, Raven ended up changing a handful of weapons and on paper kind of eviscerated a few, but how does that actually translate to in-game? Now, there's definitely a couple of weapons that they attempted to nerf and definitely a couple of weapons they attempted to buff. As for the nerfs, we saw the Cooper Carbine have a couple of recoil penalties to the compressed rounds and the 22-inch barrel. Not too terribly destructive though. The KGM-40 on paper reduced a lot in regards to damages, sprint to fire times, muzzle velocities, and recoil control, but in practice, in the actual Warzone, it really didn't demean the weapon as much as it may seem. Is it a clear-cut top rifle anymore? No, I'd say that there's kind of a handful above, as you'll see, but to me, this kind of brings it in line with a Kilo or maybe like a Krig 6, where it's a very easy to use weapon, very easy to pick up with minimal recoil. Okay damage, decent damage depending on it, but it all kind of levels out. It's no longer that head and shoulders best weapon that you'll see. Then they attempted to nerf the Armaguerra, again on paper, all red across the board, but truly it's not that bad in close quarters. I'd still take it over most weapons, as you'll see. And the Marco got hit in the damage aspect, but if you're accurate and you get your shots off first, you won't notice too much of an issue with this one. Weapons that got buffs though ended up including the Growl 556, definitely worth using, as we'll detail in a second. The Vargo 52, again, detailing in just a second, but man, they helped restore this thing to almost the entire former glory. The Vargo S got buffs to make it a good sniper support weapon now, I'd say, but not necessarily top 10. The Marksman rifles got really good adjustments to them, but realistically, they're not super worth using unless you just want to be an assist machine. The Fennec isn't terrible now. It had a very good damage multiplier increase to the neck, but that's going to be more substantial in close range play, but it may be irrelevant depending on the map you're playing on. And the PPSH, definitely worth using now. So as for these top weapons, I know that we mentioned normally there's some room for differentiation in weapons depending on the situations you're in, but honestly, I think these first few will absolutely be the emerging Season 5 meta that are the most solidified in their spaces. So I want to start with these. First, let's take a look at the medium to long range play here. Number one on this, I definitely think, is the UGM-8. The UGM has been something that's been in and out of the sort of top main long-range metas for a little bit, but right now, I definitely think it's solidified as that best long-range weapon here that you can use in Warzone. For this, we've talked about the build before, so we won't stay on it too long, that being the MX Silencer, the 736mm barrel. Personally, I have been on the 2.5 times optic. I know that a lot of people use the 3 to 6 times, and with the introduction of that scope glint, it is something that may sway you one way or the other if you go 2.5 or 3 to 6, but it really all depends on what you want out of it. For me, it's the first stock of the Anchor stock, the hand stop, the 6.5mm Sakura 125 round magazine, lengthened, the hatched grip for additional recoil control as well as flinch resistance, tight grip as well as fully loaded. So this thing, honestly, again, you have a lot of rounds to work with. Yes, it does kind of burn through your ammo if you do have to take multiple engagements, but it is something that will absolutely get the job done. Next, another weapon that, again, we talked about is almost restored to its former glory, and while I don't think it's quite there just yet, it is pretty dang close. That being the Vargo 52 from Black Ops Cold War. Not the Vargo S from Vanguard, but still the Cold War 52 version. This having some of the ADS sort of penalties and transition in and out times adjusted with this update, it just makes it a little bit quicker of a snap on a weapon, and with it being something that the damage still pretty high for a rifle, and then also very minimal recoil. It can bounce a little bit, but for the most part, it's pretty much a point and shoot weapon. It is, in my books right now, definitely the best rifle out there in Warzone. For this, run the GRU suppressor, the Task Force barrel, Axial Arms 3 times optic, Spetsnaz grip, and the 60 round magazine. Now, shifting gears slightly, we're going to end up talking a little about some close range play and what I think is this defined meta so far for Season 5. The Blixen is still very, very good. It again had some of those adjustments made to it where on the 17-inch barrel, the recoil control was decreased. We saw the headshot multiplier removed from the 54 round magazine, which is what you normally want to be running. So it had some adjustments, but truly, it doesn't make too much difference here. It still is a powerhouse in-game, and is one that I would say is probably still your best bet in terms of SMG play. For this, run the recoil booster, the 17-inch F3 barrel, the slate reflector, the removed stock, the hand stop, the Grinko 54 round magazine, lengthened, taped grip, and then the perks of fleet and quick. After that, the Armaguerra is still, again, another insane weapon. That fire rate in close quarters is going to be hard-pressed to be matched by just about anything. There are a few weapons that may be able to give it a run for its money, but for the time being, I'd still say it is a top meta weapon. For this, run the recoil booster, the body 315mm barrel, the slate reflector, the folding stock. Personally, I'm liking the skeletal underbarrel for a little bit more of that ADS and movement speed. Then you'll want to run the 60-round magazine with lengthened, the taped grip, hard scoped, as well as quick. Now, the final weapon we'll talk about here in terms of this definitive top 5 for close range play is one that is a kind of newer weapon to the overall meta. It's been in the top 10 here and there, but for a weapon that's clearly defined, it's relatively newer to that space, this being the PPSH, to which I'd run the recoil booster, the 300mm barrel. The optic can really go either way here. I'll run the slate reflector on it just for a little bit more pinpoint precision, whereas other weapons I sometimes like the iron sights. Then you want to run the removed stock for increased hip fire accuracy, movement speed, and sprint to fire speed. The skeletal underbarrel, again, for more ADS and movement speed. The 8mm Nambu 71 round magazine. Subsonic is an ammo type you can use here to stay off the minimap. If you want to, you can use lengthen, but again, if you're playing for close quarters, it's not really necessary, but it is something that's up to you, whatever preference you prefer. The taped grip for, again, a bit more sprint to fire speed, movement speed, and aiming stability. Tight grip to be able to control that recoil because the fire rate on this is pretty insane, as with all PPSHs, they normally are. And then quick, again, for a bit more sprint speed. So not only one is this a super fast firing weapon that in close will shred through your enemies, but also it is something that will allow you to just zoom around the map with how much we have it kitted out for movement, sprint to fire, and ADS. So it is one that is phenomenal here, and I'd highly recommend. Now, to me, that's our definitive top tier weapons for this current meta, but if you're enjoying the video so far, you found it at all insightful through the first 5, do me a favor and drop a like on the video, and maybe consider subscribing if you guys are new as well and want to stay up to date with all things Warzone and Modern Warfare 2 upcoming. But on to the second half here of this listing. These aren't necessarily more so viable and competitive weapons, but kind of round out our top 10, maybe not as the definitive top weapons, but are definitely in the running. For me, I'd recommend the Grau 556, and as a fan of the Grau, I am so happy to see this thing return. It is a rather consistent straight shooter of a weapon. You don't need a ton for recoil control. It's rather easy to do at its base, but again, while not having any massive monster damage per round values, it is a consistent shooter that will get the job done. The Grau, I'd recommend the mono suppressor, the Tempest Archangel barrel, the 3x optic, the Commando foregrip, and the 60 round magazine as well. After that, I'd end up recommending the Marco, again, still pretty solid and competitive in that top 10. For the Marco, I'd recommend the recoil booster, the 240mm barrel, the slate reflector, the Imerito FR stock, the hand stop, the Nambu 64 round magazines, subsonic again for close quarters, the skeletal underbarrel, the Nambu 64 round drum mags, subsonic again if you're in close quarters. Lengthened isn't necessarily so much a priority, but staying off the radar could be. The taped grip, gung-ho, and quick. After that, another weapon that we're going to go back to for Cold War is one that I still think is very fun to use, is that of the XM4. But of course, this being one we've talked about before, we can breeze past this. The agency suppressor, task force barrel, axial arms 3x optic, field agent grip, and the 60 round magazine. Now, to me, I don't think it's quite to the level of the Vargo, but it's still a very easy to use and very fun weapon to use as well. They can get the job done. After that, these next two kind of rounding out our top 10 that could be expendable. They could be on the inside looking out or outside looking in, depending on your preference. I'm going to jump to one of the newer weapons of the RA225. This, I'd recommend the recoil booster, the needle barrel, the slate reflector, the MB stock, the skeletal underbarrel, the 55 round drum mag, subsonic, taped grip, tight grip, as well as quick. Again, kind of kitting it out for a little bit more speed, but also a little bit of control as well. Now, oppositely, the EX1, not really worth talking about here, so if you guys are wondering where that falls, not really in the top 10. The final weapon, though, that we'll talk about is the KGM40, and coming back to that, again, this is still a weapon that is pretty solid, but it's more so consistent rather than dominant at this point, if you ask me, where it's a very easy to control weapon, but overall, it's not going to be fielding as much damage as it was beforehand, and when you have things like the Vargo that, yes, may bounce a bit more in terms of that that recoil, it's a safer choice option, I think, for your loadouts. It can get the job done, but it's not going to do it as quick as other weapons because you're opting in for a more balanced weapon rather than something that has a bit more high risk, high reward. More recoil, but more damage along that line of thinking. But that's my top 10 weapons here that I'd say for Season 5. Of course, kind of giving you a sniper one now for a sort of 11th build. I'd recommend the 3-line sniper. I still think that's the best one yet for sniping. That, I'd recommend the Mercury silencer, the Empress 514mm barrel, the Zach Custom MZ stock, the skeletal underbarrel for a little more ADS speed and movement speed, the 30-06 20-round magazine. That did get a slight nerf to it, but truly in terms of regular overall gameplay, independent of titanium trials and iron trials, it's going to be still your best bet for your magazine. Lengthened, the leather grip, silent focus, and then I'd run on hand for that additional ADS speed. Now, again, as we always talk about, is this the only 10 weapons you should be using? Absolutely not. There are a bunch of honorable mentions. The P90 was a weapon that got substantial changes here as of this update. It's fun to play around with, but I don't think that I'd say it's meta. I don't think that I put it in the top 10, but it can do well for you. The bar, it had its buffed magazine capacity for the 8mm rounds from 40 to 50, so that makes it a nice helping hand. But with the recent nerfs, I'd probably place it just on the outside looking in rather than inside looking out. The STG-44 is still solid, so there's absolutely a handful of weapons you can use if these aren't necessarily your cup of tea. But for me, that's my recommendations, and that's what we're going to call it. So that said, let me know your thoughts down below. What do you guys think of the meta so far this season? Are you liking the sort of health and the amount of weapons you can use? Are you not necessarily liking it? Whatever the case, drop your thoughts below. But if you enjoyed the video, you found it at all insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on the video. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing, running all things Warzone, Season 5, Modern Warfare 2 upcoming, and anything Call of Duty related. We'll keep you the deal with everything, so if you guys are at all interested, I'd love to have you in the community. That said, thanks so much for watching. I'm Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care, and peace.